Welcome to Your Story, His Glory with Janelle Berker. Joining us today is Brenda Counts. She is 69 years old and has been at Heritage since 2002. And we're going to jump into her life story and find out how God has brought her through some difficult places. And Brenda, we're so glad that you were willing to join us today
Thank you.
Talk with us. I do also want you all to know that when I first met Brenda, she was serving in children's ministry, and you were just a joy to be around. Marin was too, and I was stressed about her being in there, and I got to enjoy chatting with you and getting to know you. And the thing I got to know was that you were so kind and so loving towards my child and all the others as well. And I do that as a little intro so that you can kind of understand Brenda's heart as we walk into these places to learn who you are and how God has shaped your life in significant ways. Welcome.
Thank you.
Brenda, will you tell us how you came to know the Lord, and how old you were, and what the situation was before you knew Him, and then how you came to know Him?
Okay. So I was raised in a very dysfunctional family. We knew God and we knew police officers, and they were one and the same in my life. If you did bad, then the police were going to come get you, or God was going to strike you dead. My parents were hard workers. They were a waitress and a cook, and my dad was a very bad alcoholic. He didn't really know how to be a father. He didn't know how to be a husband, but they somehow made it together for 16 years and had 4 children, and I was the oldest of 4, so I got to be mama a lot back then. As far as church goes, we would go your obligatory Easter or Christmas. We would get a new dress, a new outfit, new frilly socks, and get dressed up and go to church. But I don't ever remember a time when my dad went into a church with us or by himself. And then my mom would take us, and we would be on a high for a while from, I guess, all the candy at Easter, and then, knowing church. But we had a lady in our neighborhood, Miss Grace, and she would go around on Saturday mornings and just gather up all her little chickens, and didn't drive, didn't know how, didn't really know she was going to get us to church. But we went to a little church in Cash Holler when we could all load up in her daughter's car on Sunday mornings. And that's where I was really introduced to who Jesus was at 5 years old, And in and out of my life for several years, I was back and forth. The church ministry that actually was before Heritage, the people that started Heritage, I went to the church before that, and they had a huge bus ministry, and I'm a firm believer in that, because if it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't have continued to go to church. So that's pretty much. At 12, I was saved, but then again at 17, I was saved, and then again at 22, I was saved. I was back and forth. I was just... life was so rocky that I guess I really got serious about my walk in my mid-20s when I had a child and saw how important it was, and started trying to really be serious about my walk with God.
So, as you say, those 3 different times that you were saved, does that mean that you walked the aisle and tried to live in a way that was pleasing?
Yes, that's what I did. And it was in different churches, it was in different congregations, different times of my life, whenever I was, struggling or not struggling.
So you were trying to follow the rules, maybe?
Right, follow rules. to say that I had a real relationship with Christ, that I had him fully in my heart, that didn't occur until I was in my mid-20s, and I started getting serious about that.
I appreciate you sharing that because I think a lot of people can identify with, I had this emotional thing that I knew I was doing the right motion in walking the aisle, and I was looking the part,
Yeah.
but maybe didn't understand what the gospel was.
Exactly.
So you became really serious about your faith in your mid-20s.
Right.
And what did that look like? How did moving forward from that point look different than all the other points where you were just trying to follow the rules?
Because there was so much outside life coming at me. I was a single mom by that time. I was just trying to struggle to get through. It was still a part of my life. Like I would try to go to church on Sunday and do the right thing and all. But during the week, it was like I just tried to do everything still on my own, because that's the kind of personality I had. Like I say, oldest of four, struggling to get through life, growing up. And it was hard for me to give up control of situations. So it was bittersweet. I knew God, but to say that I would sit down on a regular basis and read the Bible or do a Bible study or live a real Christian life, it just came and went.
I appreciate that. I think
guess
that's common.
I liken it, if I can, not to interrupt you, but I kind of liken it, and this is awful, but to a genie, And when I would need something from him, I would go to him and, rub the magic lantern and, God, I need you now. I don't have enough money to get through this week, or this one's sick. I can't miss work. What am I going to do? Who's going to help me, here? Just different things like that. And it still took me a few more years to get really, really serious about and realize who he truly was.
Sure. That he did care about you, that
Yeah,
you could go to
yeah,
him
yeah.
all the time, even about things that may look small in the eyes of other people.
Right.
That he cares about relationship.
Yes.
That I think is a pivotal point in everybody's walk and understanding of the Lord, is that he wants a relationship with me.
Right.
Me? Why?
I didn't feel worthy.
Yes.
Just didn't work worthy enough.
So as you had mentioned that you were a single mom, can we go back?
Yes.
And talk about how old were you when you got married, and a little bit, you told us your home life was very stressful. You were taking care of yourself and siblings, and in a chaotic home. Would you tell us a little bit more about?
Okay. So when I was 16, my parents had divorced when I was 12. My mother had remarried. She more or less got out of the frying pan into the fire. She divorced a very abusive alcoholic to marrying another abusive alcoholic. And I got so tired of going through it, and we ended up losing our home and into the housing project, and all my friends turned their backs on me and that type of thing and everything. So anyway, I met a guy, and he's 17 and I'm 16, and of course I look back on it now and I think we fell in lust. We're 16, 17.
Sure.
We decided he wanted to marry me. He wanted to get me out of that life. And we went to Mom and asked her, and she was like, absolutely no, I'm a junior in high school. So we got pregnant on purpose. And so I went and told her, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And so we got married, and we had 9 months later, we had a bouncing baby boy, 9 pounds, 4 ounces, 21 and a half inches long, and just, the joy of my life. He was just perfectly healthy. Just God bless me so much there. But I didn't know that. I didn't know how blessed I was. And so we began life with that. And 3 years later, we ended up divorcing. And I was a single mom. So fast forward, when he is 5 years old, I remarry. And I marry another alcoholic, just like my mom did. Things continue and all, and I get pregnant, and I have a little girl. I carry her full term, and she is fine on Monday when I have it. I went for an ultrasound, and everything's fine. And on Friday, I go into labor, and when she's born, she's stillborn. So got through that, and just I guess maybe I would like to back up just for a minute and say that not long ago in a Bible study, a friend asked, "What did you want to be when you grew up?" All I ever wanted to be was a mama. I wanted to be a mama. I wanted to have 5 children. I wanted to live in the white picket fence house with a dog and a cat and, 2 or 3 trees and a garden. And that's all I didn't want to work. I just wanted to stay home. And so when things like this started happening, I started questioning, what's going on? What's wrong with me? It always came back to me. What's wrong with me? So fast forward, we had 2 more miscarriages, and then I got pregnant with my second son, and he was born.
I just wanted to say, those things in itself are so difficult. And I love that, wishing for the kids in a quiet home, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's, it is, especially at that time in the world, that was very common. And so it wasn't something out of reach that you would be able to wish for or long for in your heart. But God had a different plan. So as Chris and Kansas.
Yes.
And did you name the baby girl?
Erica Nicole.
Oh, yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So as you are longing for these babies and God has a plan for you in this, your baby girl dies. And did you throw yourself more to Chris and loving on him?
Yes.
How do you react in that moment?
Well, I guess everybody's different, but I went into a deep, deep depression. And I remember they had a field day at school one day. Chris is 5. He's in kindergarten. And I went to school, and the teacher took me aside, and she said, "Can I talk to you for just a little bit?" And I said, "Of course." And she goes, "I want you to know that Chris has changed since you lost your baby." She said, "He is mourning. He's mourning so bad." She said, "He's fell in his grades." And I'd noticed he'd fail, and wasn't as interested in everything. He would come along beside me, and, "Mama, are you all right?" Put his arms around me and lay his head on me. And just, I was so blessed with 2 boys that loved me so much that it was uncanny how much that they cared for me. But anyway, that opened my eyes to get out of myself, okay? And I realized you got to stop feeling sorry for yourself. You've got to stop, And so I started pouring myself more into him, into what was going on in his life and stuff like that. And it helped me heal. It helped me to realize that, no, you don't have this, what you thought it was going to look like. But God gave you this other child. He's healthy. He's a happy boy. He needs you, And so I poured myself into him, and it got better. And then, I ended up getting divorced after 5 years from there. Well, he actually left us, and when Kansas was 6 weeks old, for another woman. So I was a single mom for 8 years, raising them by myself, and met my now husband, Roger. And I guess Kansas was 6 when we got married, and Chris was 11. Chris had moved. I had lived for a little stint in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he went to a different school from anything that was around here. It was a huge school. It was he was bused far away. He didn't take to that very well at all. He liked to fish, he liked to hunt, he liked to get outdoors. We lived in a big city. You couldn't do any of that over there. So one summer he decided that he wanted to come back home and live with his dad in East Tennessee. Well, of course, Mama said, no, you're not, Well, I let him come for 6 weeks thinking that he would come back, and it was love at first sight. He came home. It was the best thing. I didn't see it then. He came back. He went to UNACA, which you're very familiar with UNACA.
Sure.
There were 64 kids in his class. Everybody knew everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived with just his dad. He was divorced too. And they just got along so good. And he was a good father. Had been a raging alcoholic, but by then he'd gotten his life straightened out. He was in church. He took Chris to church, and Chris even found a church of his own and was going on his own. So broke my heart. I put in for a transfer so I could come back to Tennessee. Got transferred back here so that I would be at least within a car's distance ride to where I could see him on weekends and that type of thing. So we had a really good relationship as much as possible, from that.
That's great. So Chris is in high school.
Yes.
And he's living his best life,
Yes.
playing baseball,
Playing
right?
baseball. That child, from the time he was old enough to hold a baseball bat until through high school, that was his life. He just lived and dreamed baseball. And he was actually at Cardinal Park one day. I wasn't at the game because back then they played their games during the daytime, Of course, Mama was working all the time, and neither one of us, his dad worked during the day, and we didn't get to go to many of his games. But anyway, this particular game, when he slid into second base and he tried to stand up, he couldn't. And they had to put in a substitute, and he had to go sit down. Well, it wouldn't get any better 2 weeks later, so his coach called me, and he said, I think you need to take Chris to the doctor. This is not getting better. There might be something, you might have pulled a muscle or torn a ligament or something. So I, at that time, worked for an insurance agency that she worked with a lot of orthopedic doctors. Back then, we didn't have the Dr. Waldrops, around. It took like 4 or 5, 6 months to get into an orthopedic doctor. So she got me in the next week with a doctor in Bristol. So got him in. It was on a Monday. I remember taking Kansas. We were in the room together and just sitting and waiting. They took him out for an x-ray, and they brought him back, and they said, we think we found something. He's either got I heard him say sarcoma, and I wasn't a nurse or anything by then, and at that time, or a calcium deposit on his femur bone, and we want him back in on Wednesday for a PET scan. And so, in an MRI. So we set that up and everything. Of course, I left thinking, I was in shock. I remember walking down that hall just like it was yesterday, smelling the smells, the feeling, the nurses all come around me, and it was like, something's bad wrong here, So I go home and I call my ex-husband and I tell him what's going on, tell him we have to be there on Wednesday and everything. Well, his aunt had helped him with Chris a lot, and she had a son that was the same age as Chris, and they all came with us on Wednesday when we went for the ultrasound. Called us Wednesday afternoon and said, we need you to come back in on Thursday. We got the results back already. Went in, and they were 99.9% sure that it was cancer without having done a biopsy. So they asked us, where do you want to go? There's St. Jude's, there's Mayo Clinic, there's, this, that, and the other. And I knew this orthopedic doctor through working with him just a little bit through the insurance company. So I said, "You've got boys. Where would you send your son if you were going through this with one of your children?" He said, "I think I would go to Richmond, Virginia, to MCV. There's a doctor there named Dr. Chris Foster, and he specializes in these kind of injuries. At that time, the only choice you had was amputation if the chemo didn't work, or they would put in a metal rod. And if they put in a metal rod, your leg, of course, stayed straight, for the rest of your life." So that was on Thursday. They had us set up on Monday to go to Richmond to have the biopsy. We went to St. Mary's Hospital, me, my ex-husband, and my son. And now keep in mind, I've got a husband at home that had never met my ex-husband, that this was kind of an awkward situation, as you can imagine, and a 9-year-old at that time. And he, it was just a different situation. Let's just leave it at that. But anyway, we went up there and they did the biopsy. And while they had him on the table, they came out and said, "Yes, it's cancer. It's osteosarcoma. It's bone cancer." And so they closed it up and they immediately transferred us to MCV. They called in a group of cancer doctors, and we went through the whole 9 yards. They explained to us what was, it was very advanced, and we needed to start treatment as soon as possible. And so thus we started. They put in a port, and we stayed there and had a treatment and then came home. All of this with just thinking we're going to go for a biopsy,
Sure.
So it was a lot. And I remember there were 4 of the cancer doctors. One of them, the very first one that came in to see us, we had laid there all day long in a bed waiting, and just nervous, not knowing what was going to happen, what they were going to tell us, how we were going to go about any of this. And when she did come in, she goes, "Okay, Chris, here's the deal. You've got really bad cancer." I mean, her bedside manner was awful. "You are going to have to suck it up. You're going to have to be under really 5 days of treatment each time you come in. You're going to get deathly sick. You'll probably be sterile." I mean, she just went through all the bad things, and everything. And we're just sitting there, just hanging on to our seats. And he starts bawling. And my son doesn't cry. He's all boy. He's an American baseball player, and he's all boy. And so she just wants to prepare us, wants to get him in the mindset that you can't give up. I mean, in hindsight, I know what she was trying to do, but she went about it pretty harsh, So the very next morning, they put the port in. We had to wait 24 hours to make sure that it was, going to work really well and everything like that. They started the chemo, and that was the beginning.
Wow. That is so harsh and difficult when you had not really been given that news
Right.
previously. You hadn't had time to prepare
No.
to know
None
what
of
you were
us
going to be
had.
going through.
Him. Just can you imagine being 16 and your whole life's ahead of you, and just being thrown all that. It was hard, and it was hard for me and his dad too to watch our baby, go through something like this. I mean,
And to know that this diagnosis doesn't have good prognosis.
Right.
So as you prepare to walk through this and do all the chemo and come to terms with the difficult road that your son's going to have, will you tell me what was in your heart? How did you react to God? How did those emotions come out?
I tried to be strong in front of him. I didn't want him to see me hurt, and I wanted to be as as comforting and as uplifting to him as I could, he immediately was mad. He was mad at the world. He was,
Sure.
knowing that he might lose his leg, because they didn't mix any words when they told him what he was facing and everything. So what we decided to do was, try a couple treatments. If that didn't work, then we would have to amputate, but we would talk about that in the future. So we knew, that might be coming. So we came home and we got him settled, and of course, he lived in Elizabeth with his dad. I lived in Blountville. I went home, and I think for 2 days I cried. I was a serious Christian by then. I was very involved in our church. I had a wonderful church family, and but I need to back up just for a minute and say the day that we went to the doctor on Monday, before we ever went for the biopsy or anything like that, my company, the company I work for, went bankrupt. Roger had already been, my now husband, had already been laid off from the phone company for about 4 months, and he was working 3 part-time jobs. So we had no insurance through him anymore. I was carrying our insurance, and my boss called me to see how things went and to tell me that the company went bankrupt that day and that I didn't have a job anymore. So here I am faced with who knows, what kind of. And so after 30 days, we lost our insurance, and his father had a little, he worked at a plant here in Johnson City, and he had a little bit of a insurance policy. So that all that is playing in my mind. How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to deal with this? Well, it was just so overwhelming. But God, I had people at church praying for me, and the main thing that kept coming to me was 1 hour at a time. Pray for the next hour. Pray for the next day. Pray for, just you can't, because I'm such a control freak, I've got to plan out what's going to happen, and everything. And there was nothing in my control at this time. So
I love that because, I was expecting you to say 1 day at a time.
no.
And I appreciate you recognizing that you needed God every minute to
Every
hold
minute.
you and all the pieces. I can't even get my mind around the stress level that you were faced with in those moments. And the biggest fears of security, your family's health, your future with your child, but God.
But God. And he sent so many loving people around me. I mean, people would walk up to me. You know how our church is. It's so big that you know most people, but there's a lot of people that you don't know that well because they're so new that you haven't met them. People would walk up to me that I didn't even know. I calculated what it's going to cost you. I know you're going to Richmond this week. Here's a check for 3 meals a day, gas money, a little extra spending money if Chris should need something. If you need anything else, you let me know. I mean, we couldn't pay our bills. We couldn't pay our house payment. We just barely made ends meet. And it was constant. People would buy us groceries and bring them to us. They just, God just provided everything we needed, even down to where the worst part about it was we didn't have money to buy to pay for his prescription. He had prescriptions that he had to come home on, and it was like $500 a month.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have $50 to go towards that, and I applied for disability and Medicaid and everything, and they turned me down because they were going by because he lived with his father the biggest part of the time. They wouldn't go by, they used his income. And so but together we couldn't even afford it,
Right.
So anyway, that was a miracle. I went to the office one day and saw the lady, and we went over everything. And she goes, "I'm sorry, honey, you just don't qualify. If you could tell me that he lives with you, half the time, then I could, and I said, well, it varies. Some weeks when he was real sick, he would stay with me at my house, and I would take care of him because his daddy just could not stand it. He would literally stand in the door and watch him and cry and say, why is this happening to you? And it would tear Chris down. It would just really tear him down. But anyway, I couldn't honestly say, no, he lives with me, because some months he would live with me a week, some he would be there for 2 weeks, So, in being honest, then I got said no to. The very next morning, she called me. No, at 5 o'clock that afternoon, she called me back. And she said, Miss Counts, I need to ask you something. Can you tell me there's any month out of the year that during any of this time that your son lives with you at least a half of a month? I said, yes, like I told you, it varies. Sometimes he stays with me. It just depends on how harsh his treatments were, and they were very harsh. And how sick he gets. I said, it varies. She said, be at my office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I went back in, we refiled the papers, and 30 days later we got an okay on it. So they were going to he was going to draw a check for like $700 and some a month. We didn't get it until February, but at least we knew it was retro, so that we were able to take care of things. But
which more than covered his treatment.
Right. So that was a God thing,
So as you walk through these pieces and you're watching your son suffer and he's fighting, because that's his personality, and you're at the same time having to pull back and allow God to be in control of your life and all the pieces. What advice would you have for others who might be walking just in the midst of that, not knowing?
I have this thing, and it's whether it's a school shooting, whether it's the mother that does the shooting, whether it's the children that get killed, when another mother loses a child or whatever. I don't know why God puts these things in my life. I don't know why he allowed me to go through this stuff, but I do know that there's purposes in our life when things happen. And my heart goes out when another mother walks through these things. And so I feel like it's my job, it's my responsibility to reach out to that mother. And if I could say anything to anybody that's listening to this, whether you're walking through it, somebody that's walking through it, or you'll walk through it one day, God forbid, but you'll walk through it one day, is you have got to let go and let God, because he loves these children more than we do. They're his children. He just lets us borrow them. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow. I birthed this child. I went through the pains of having him, I'm up with him at night and going through all the teen years and stuff and everything. And how dare God say that this is my child and not yours? But they are. They're heirs for a moment. And when he decides to take them, then he will. So I would say live for the moment. Live for those little minutes when you think, oh, I've got to be here, I've got to be there, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. Live for that moment when your child has come to you and said, Mommy, whatever, sit there, give them the time. You don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
That's beautiful. That's a great reminder for all the parents and grandparents out there to focus on the real things, the important things in life.
That's what it's so great to be a grandparent. You do have that time, you're not.
So the listeners have probably figured out that Chris didn't make it. Would you walk us through that?
So after 2 months of treatments, they decided it wasn't shrinking the tumor, which was our goal, to try to save the leg, and so they amputated. That little booger went through that operation, and he got up the very next day. They came in to start PT, and they got him up on those crutches, and he was walking up and down that hall. He was a fighter. Of course, they were giving him pain medicine and everything like that, but 3 days later, we were home, and all of his buddies came over to see him, his girlfriend, and it was a big party and stuff like that, but we knew that we had all the treatments, to face us. So every month, we would have to drive up there. They would spend the first 12 hours hydrating you. Then they would start the chemo, and they would run it through real fast. They would wash him out because it couldn't stay in there too long because it was so powerful, so strong, that it would eat up it already eats up enough of the good cells too, but this was really so strong that they had to really, and they would have to put him completely out when he would go through these. He couldn't be awake. And so as he would start waking up and all, he was violently ill. We stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, and lots of times they would discharge us from the hospital, and we would start home. And he would be so sick. I know I had to pull off the side of the highway one time, and he was being sick, and a highway patrolman pulled up behind me, and he said, "Ma'am, you can't stop on a busy highway like this." And when he saw what was going on, he stayed there to protect us and everything. And then escorted us off, and we went back to the Ronald McDonald House. And he hated that because he wanted to get home. He wanted to get back to his friends, back to his security, and back in school, and see how the baseball team was doing, and such. But we continued to do that that started in July. And in February, we took December off. In January, they did another PET scan. And by then, it had metastasized to both lungs. So they brought us in, and they told us, and he had always told me from the get-go, "Mama," it was a learning school there, and students would come in all times of the day and, go through all that stuff. He hated that because, the doctors, the main doctors would come in and do that in the morning and do all the assessments and everything and bring us up to date on things. And then he would have to be the guinea pig and everything. And he said, "I'm tired of being their guinea pig. If this doesn't work, I'm not doing it anymore." And in my stupidity, or whatever you want to call it, said, "Chris, you're 17 years old. You're very mature for your age. You're the one that's walking through this. If that time comes, it's your choice, So the time came, and they told us that it wasn't working and that they wanted to change the protocols. And he was laying there in the bed. It was just me and him. Most of the time, I took him by myself, and because his dad was working. And when he got through, he stood there and he said, "I need you to let me know, the doctor, what do you want to do?" He said, "There's really no choice." He said, "Yes, there is a choice." And he reached there, he got took a hold of the needle, and he threw it out of him, pulled it out of his port. He said, "Mama, give me my crutches." And I said, "Chris, what are you doing?" He said, "Give me my T-shirt and give me my crutches. I'm out of here." I said, "Chris, no, you can't do this. Mama, you told me. We've already talked about this." And so he started to get down off the bed and go over and get the crutches crawling. And I said, "Okay, wait just a minute." And I gave him his shirt and I gave him his crutches. And the doctor said, you need to get him under control. Without this, he's not going to make it." So he took off down the hallway, towards the elevator. And there was nurses there that had started when he was their first patient. And they were young, beautiful nurses. And Chris, if he wasn't mine, he was a cutie. He was the sweetest kid. Both of my boys were just the sweetest kids. And they just all, come around, and they chased him down. And they said, "Chris, you can't do this." And then one came to me, she said, "You've got to get him." I said, "I don't know what to do. I can't make him do it." I said, "I'm going to take him back to the Ronald McDonald House for the night. And hopefully we'll be back here in the morning." So we left, and the doctor had given me some Valium for my nerves, to take and everything. And he said, I want to stop and get a pizza. So we stopped at a Pizza Hut, and I gave him some money to go over and put in the jukebox, and try to make it as normal as possible. And I'm just, just crying and going on. He said, Mom, you'll have to get a hold of yourself. You're embarrassing me. You just get over it. It is what it is. And, So when he was over putting the money in the jukebox, I put one of those Valium in his Coke. And tried to stir it up, and get it and everything, because I thought I was going to knock him out and get him back to the room, and then he'd sleep all night and get up the next morning and come to his senses. Well, it didn't faze him. He drank it. He ate some pizza. We went back to, then they had a game room, and he was real close to the guy that ran the Ronald McDonald House there. They, just big buddies. He actually drove to Tennessee one time to watch him play in one of his baseball games. That's how close they got. And also, I went up to the room and I was calling. That was before cell phones. I was calling everybody I knew. Pray that he changes his mind. And I was crying and I was tore out of pieces and I was on my knees and I was, God, please, you've got to change. I know I told him he could make this decision, but if there's this much of a chance, we've got to do it.
Sure.
We've got to.
Sure.
So he came back to the room. He stayed up there till about 4:30. Just stayed down there till about 4:30. And he came back to the room and he said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And I said, okay, I want you to get some rest. And we went to sleep, and I can't remember if I'd set an alarm or whatever, but at 8 o'clock I remember waking up, and I woke him up and I said, Chris, please, for the love of God, please. I was down on my hands and knees beside his cot, and I said, please go back to the hospital and let's just try one treatment. And he sat there for a few minutes and he said, okay, we'll try, but I'm not doing any more, Mama. Now, you told me I could make this decision. And I said, but what if this works, honey? What if this works? So we went back, and they still had, all of his stuff was in his room and everything like that. And they went ahead and did this treatment. And it was a shorter treatment. And we packed up, went home, didn't have to go back to the Ronald McDonald House. We had to wait a month. They sent him locally for another PET scan, and it wasn't working.
Okay.
So the doctors up there did a call with the doctors down here. They did where they do the group chat, a group call before and everything like that. And they conferred together, and they all agreed that it wasn't going to stop. It was just going to continue. And we'd done everything we could do. And the best thing to do, and by then this is March. And so we all met at the doctor's office in Bristol, and we got an oncologist here in Bristol so that we didn't have to travel back and forth up there forever. And he took over so that we could, just take the hospice time and make the best out of life.
So you just enjoyed the rest.
Right. And they put him on pain management and stuff.
How long did he live after
He
that?
lived from March. When we found out to March, he died June 29th. He graduated. He wanted to walk across the stage. That was another thing. The Shriners came in and sent him and had him the latest, greatest, up-to-date prosthetic, and because we had one made here and he couldn't use it, and he got to walk across the stage on May the 17th, and on June the 29th, he took his last breath.
So thank you for walking through that difficult place again. So can you tell us a little bit about how you come to terms with burying your son, and how Jesus held you because as an outsider, we look at those situations and we say, I could never do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how I could even get out of bed. I don't know how I could put one foot in front of the other. Will you tell us how you were able?
I went into shock. I was in shock. I didn't realize it, but I thought because I was a Christian, the very next Sunday, I had to put on a smiling face, go to church, act like nothing was wrong, and just be happy. I cried for a week and then put on my happy face, got up and went to church on Sunday morning. I'd been crying all night and just smiled and went on and tried to be the obligatory Christian and just accept things. And that was me until 3 months later, and I had a nervous breakdown.
Sure. I think at some point we can't just put on the reality sets in, right? And you have to just be where you are and figure out how to make it. Brenda, this has been just an incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing your love of Jesus, your love for other people, the hurt you've walked through, and the way that you've come through it. This is not the only conversation we're going to have with you. We're going to have a part 2. So you have a lot more to say.
Yeah.
And I want to say thank you for giving your time today.
Yeah. Thank you. And to God be the glory, because it's only because of him that I'm sitting here today.
Thank you. And you definitely shared your story for his glory.